House TRW, our second committee of the general session. Go ahead and get live and call the roll.
Representative Campbell.
Here.
Representative Connolly.
Here.
Representative Harshman.
Here.
Representative Jarvis.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Storer.
Here.
Representative Thayer.
Here.
Representative Wharf.
Here.
Chairman Byron.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And I would like to welcome Co-Chair Harshman back. We missed him last week. Glad to have him by my side. He was a pick for my committee as my co-chair because he's led a few of these, just a few. Any words, Mr. Harshman?
No, it's a great committee. When I was a freshman, I served on TRW, and I think as Wyoming's largest employer and our second largest industry, this committee is so important because this is going to really grow Wyoming and attract young people. And it's so important. And, you know, there was talk on the floor of the House. You gave me the mic, so here I go, Mr. Chairman. There was talk on the floor of the House yesterday about our bond rating slipping from AAA to AA plus and AA. Part of that was the crash, you know, in the spring of 2016. But S&P also looks at our demographics. And we're getting really old. And this outdoor recreation, this whole TRW thing with young people is such a huge thing for our state. And so the work that this committee does, so I'm honored to be here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Decorum, many of you have sat in committees. If you have not, be nice or leave, as my great former colleague, Representative Sandy Newsom said. Be civil. Please work through the chair. And for my committee and for everyone in the audience, please silence your phones. Know when you are looking at us up here, we are going to do kind of a working lunch. Some folks may be eating. Some people may be taking notes on their computers. Some may be writing notes. So keep on subject, keep it brief, and Zoom, we will get to you at the end of public testimony. We're going to try to hear 3 bills today. We're going to go ahead and get started. First bill is House Bill 5, second bill is House Bill 204, and I will have to grab Representative Allemand out of appropriations for House Bill 211, so there might be a brief moment of pause there, but we'll get going on House Bill number 5. And to present that bill will be myself. And I'm actually, because I didn't get to do this last week, I am going to hand it over to my co-chair and I'm going to head down.
Okay, good afternoon, Representative Byron. House Bill 5 is on the table, and please present.
Thank you. House Bill 5 for the committee is Fishing Outfitters and Guides Registration of Fishing Boats. Give a little brief history of this bill. Prior to my time in the body, at about 15, no, maybe 20 years ago, there's a group of outfitters statewide that got together in Thermopolis to self-regulate because we noticed that guiding had gotten to be a growing industry and many of our rivers were getting overcrowded. That effort was valiant at first, but we got into the summer and started rowing our boats and began to kind of end and never got revisited. So about 10 years ago, it's a bit of a friendly topic on this committee and in our house, popped back up, and then I championed it in the last few sessions, the general and then also the budget session. And this is a committee bill that came out of both that first general session interim and then onto the budget session interim. So going into the bill, the problem we're trying to solve is our rivers are getting overcrowded with commercial activity. And many of them are unregulated and the experience is being adversely influenced and affected. So starting page 1, you can read the act and then heading on down to lines 13 and 14. Commercially guided fishing boats, regulatory authority, some definitions in there. I think it's important to note, page 2, line 1, to protect the quality of the fishing experience. We will likely hear from some other departments today, but you know, the surveys that are done statewide continue to have pretty impressive results. Our fish populations generally, except maybe a few exceptions year to year because of, you know, weather influences or runoff, are very strong, which is great. You know, one thing to note is there is some data out there, especially in the central part of the state, with some deformalities and jaw scarring around fish in the Casper region, just to the amount of times those fish are being caught. Look at Representative Provenza for a joke there, but she's not going to give me one. You know, I think that's really worth noting because that creel survey is so strong, but it's hard to listen when you're catching these fish time after time again and seeing deformed or missing parts of their jaw. So the quality of the fishing experience is super important in that first paragraph. Paragraph 2 goes on. I think it's worth noting the commission may, that's a big may, promulgate rules governing the registration and means of tracking the number of boats. You know, as we've worked this through the last 2 years, the commission's done a great job of setting out some cameras, some motion sensor cameras at certain sensitive areas across the state, and had some data for us, you know, on the Green River, on the Platte River, and in Thermopolis, and it was deciphered and kind of hard to tell whether or not it was, in my opinion, guides or recreational fishermen. But the point is, we would like to essentially have the option for the commission, if they so choose, to hold, follow the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act, and potentially hold public meetings to talk about regulating the amount of boats on certain pieces of water in that area. Carrying on to page 3, you can read a few definitions there. I think it is one other part of it that's important. Let me hop back to page 2. A big part of this bill is line 14. We're trying to get a grasp of how many commercial fishing guided boats. Let me refer for those listening on Zoom. This is purely commercial, not private. So we're trying to get an idea of how many boats are on these sections of water. There's a lot of different guide companies. They'll tell you there's 100 in their neck of the woods, or 50, or a couple hundred. I can tell you 20 years ago as a fishing guide in northwest part of the county, there was maybe 30. And then now we call it the boat hatch, not the mayfly hatch. The boat hatch appears in the morning between 5 and 8 p.m. in Casper, Thermopolis, and in Lincoln and Sublette counties. And there are boats everywhere getting out there to take people fishing on our rivers. So the rules shall require registration and payment to try to figure out how many are actually operating. The registration sticker shall be displayed on the boat and the vehicle or the trailer under this subsection, so it can just begin to track some of that data. With that, Mr. Chairman, I can stand for questions from our committee.
Okay, members, any question of the bringer of the bill? Representative Campbell. And then Representative Thayer will be next.
Thank you. First question for you, thank you for the information in bringing this bill. With the, requiring a registration and payment of annual fees, do we have a ballpark as to how much those might be? Or those will be things that the Game and Fish Commission would then determine based on what?
Representative Byron.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Campbell. That was discussed in committee often, and has been frequently discussed. We didn't want to overshoot it and make it a revenue generating stream. Really, the goal there was to cover the costs of implementing the system. So we didn't feel like we had enough information as a committee. The number 50 was floated around, and it seems a bit high for me. Some of these, AIS stickers and other areas are hovering around that $10 to $25 range, but really the intent would to be cover the actual implementation of that system.
Okay, Representative Thayer had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Committee Co-Chair. I'm Representative Byron, yep. Can you expound on the public meetings? This bill was drafted at a TRW. I just want to make sure, these are small businesses, and so I just would like to hear about public meetings that you held to get information for this draft.
Thank you.
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, Representative Thayer. This was an interim topic 2 years ago and was also discussed over this last interim. So we met, I believe, twice in Casper, and it was on the agenda both times, more so that first year. And we heard testimony And we actually went on a field trip out to the Gray Reef and had testimony from some of our federal partners and some of the law enforcement in the area that's trying to help them just keep track and keep this boat situation, commercial boat situation in order. And their testimony at that, it was an August event, I think. So August on the reef is a bit quieter. The reef really gets fished hard March, April, May, June before the moss shows up. But the testimony we heard at those meetings from outfitters and LE alike was the hundreds and hundreds of boats that line up there in the spring to take clients commercially on that set stretch of water, and just the impact that they're making. If you go to the reef, the parking lot is probably the largest boat launch I've been to in Wyoming. And they say that once they kind of get queued up and get going, there can be 10, 15, 30 rigs behind them trying to, prep their boat, get their clients squared away and get in. And these public testimony opportunities, folks zoomed in from across the state. So we heard public testimony out of Lincoln County, Sublette County, and Representative Winters, who will come up next, was on that committee. We know it's certainly affecting the Thermopolis region. So we heard a lot of public testimony just saying, hey, we really need to address this. And then if you want to jump back into the actual bill, we do have on line 2, page 12, there is a specific, page 2, line 12, there's a specific system in place that if the commission so chooses to do this, they have to follow a set of rules to get public testimony. And this has been discussed for a long time, because the last thing we want is authority to come into a region and not have testimony from local outfitters, local private landowners that are being affected by this, and certainly local anglers privately that are being affected by this commercial use. So I'm answering it two ways, but we had some in committee, and then I think it's important to note that the goal of this is to go to, if they so choose to have these meetings in these communities. And Representative Storer and I have been through this back in our neck of the woods. We do have a publicly regulated piece that is owned by our county, and we hired a consultant and went through a multi-year process similar to what's outlined here to try to figure out how much use is being done and make sure that specifically the newer guides, the young guides that don't want to latch on to a large guiding company and want to entrepreneurial and really want to get going, have an opportunity to get into these stretches, become guides, and to Representative Harshman's point, really add to the community and drive this industry, which is good for the state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So looking at page 2 and the mays and the shalls, I'm curious what the discussion was to have a may promulgate rules. I understand not wanting to force them, but do we have other areas in statute where we say we may promulgate rules and then, shall meet these other requirements where the commission is involved at least?
Mr. Chairman Byron.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative Provenza, for that. This was a big discussion in our meetings. I can't specifically answer that. I will let the agency answer that. But the reason we want may, and there are some communities that this is growing, and it may have not gotten to a tipping point yet, but it is, and we didn't want to make a mandate statewide and burden the agency to do this all across all regions. But certainly Hot Springs County, Natrona County, Lincoln County, Sublette County are the ones that are currently, and Cody a little bit, but these, as we see this industry go, to Chairman Harshman's point, there are other areas in the state that are starting to see commercial guiding. When we toured Bear River State Park down in the southwest corner, there was certainly some talk of folks that are outfitting on the Bear River and a lot more walk fishing. But so that's why the committee decided on the May.
Any other questions, members? Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a point of clarification for me, just to make sure I understand. So the intent is to give the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission authority to establish whatever rules. And then in terms of oversight, in terms of permitting and tracking and data collection, that would be our Wyoming Game and Fish Department would actually oversee that.
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, that is correct.
Any other questions? Representative Connor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I just need a clarification on the fiscal notes. It says programming to allocate launch permits will require the establishment of online portals and allow for application of permits. So those are some extra costs. But that term launch permits, is that the same amount that we're looking at that could be fees? Are they two different things? Is there a launch permit and an annual fee, or are they the same thing, just a little different language?
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Chairman Harshman. Representative Connolly, the fiscal note is derived from our fiscal department. So how they work with the commission. So I will let the commission answer that question specifically. I don't think it was the intent of the bill from coming out of committee to decide on that. I think we really want to lean on the department to lean on that, or to decide on that. Obviously, we note there's a fiscal note on this bill, and the department will talk about it. Now, one thing to be aware of is this bill does a number of things. Specifically, getting an idea of how many guides are in Wyoming is a lot different than them hosting these public meetings and going into actually potentially regulating sections of rivers. So two very different things. So although I do see this fiscal note, I'm not sure, depending on how it rolls out, this will potentially be as severe in FY26 and moving forward. If there is no pushback and the public doesn't see a need for this, then I don't know if they will have to hire that staff and have a fiscal note like this, but I would certainly default to the department on that.
Any other questions? Representative Wharf?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess when I look at this, I struggle to see why we need to do it. It seems like to me the department should already have the ability to go out, bless you. The department should have the ability to go out and look at what's going on, measure the boats. I mean, I know you mentioned the cameras and all that. The way this is written, to me, we're setting something up, but we're not. And I guess that's where I kind of struggle with this. I think there's definitely a need. I know I've been party and privy to a lot of the discussions going on around the state. And I do think that it's warranted. I just don't know that we need a bill to have them look at that. And I guess I hang up on the may part. I look at it, if we're passing a bill out of our committee, I think it should do something. And to me, there's the operative language to this is we're telling the commission they may do something. Well, they already may do that. I mean, I think they have the authority to already go out and look at all this stuff. And I would prefer that they did that and came back, being able to give us more concrete data and say, okay, we need to regulate it. This is why. But I think most of this can already be collected. The one question that I had, and this just, I look at on page 3 where you talk about a commercially guided fishing boat. I guess one of the questions I have is, okay, if I'm an outfitter and I take guys out, what happens if I just want to go out and do it myself? My boat's always going to be registered as a commercially guided fishing boat. To me, I see problems with that because I know guys go all around the state, and how you would differentiate when I'm actually operating as an outfitter in that fishery, or if I'm just going out recreating with my friends and family. That's something I don't know if the group considered that. I guess that's a question that I have. Do you know if that occurred, if they looked at how you would differentiate between a commercial boat or a non-commercial boat, or a commercial boat that's being used in a non-commercial fashion?
Thank you. Representative Byron.
Chairman Harshman, Representative Wharf, I'm going to try to answer question number 1 on the may and the shall. We have, and the industry has approached and more recently, more aggressively approached the game fish, asking a number of different entities to look into this, including the Outfitters and Guides Boards, which we may or may not hear from. And through very intensive committee work, really have narrowed it down to this being the best option. So I fully agree about the may and the shall, but wanted to leave it more broad now and have further discussion. I think that it warrants a larger discussion on outfitting in general in our state. But I think that would require a heck of an interim topic, and also maybe even some of the forbidden words like task force and interim committee work. So specific to the outfitting, because it is all encompassing, depending on how one might look at outfitting. And hopping over to the boat question, very good question. I happen to have 20 years as a professional guide, no longer have any interest in any guiding services, but it changed throughout and it changes on the jurisdiction. Early on, when I was guiding in the Bridger Teton National Forest, you would take a piece of duct tape and put a cross through your sticker if you and I were going fishing as pals one day. It has evolved to an end of month and sometimes end of season reporting, which comes with its issues. I remember being in Laramie one time as a student, and the person that was checking in the BTNF had me on a section of river up there, and I physically was in Laramie, so we had a discrepancy, but often that gets, I mean, they're 1 a year or 2 a year. So I think there's a number of ways to deal with that. I think it is a concern, and this trailer discussion was discussed, where do these stickers need to be? How do we know if I'm commercially guiding or fishing with my dad or my buddies? So I certainly would leave it to the department. I'd be happy to offer all the different ways we've done it. Flagging on the back of your boat, simple piece of duct tape works great. And even my sticker at times I Velcroed on my boat. And then when I was guiding, I'd have that Velcro on, and when I wasn't, if you and I were fishing, I'd have it off. So I think there's a lot of easy ways to address those concerns, but I think they're very valid concerns because most folks that are guiding on their days off are also going fishing. So I think it's a very warranted concern.
Okay, thank you. Just, you mentioned guides in your answer. Has to have been talk about, why don't we set up a board of professional fishing guides, and we make sure these people are actually regulated and they've had training, and like the board of outfitters, professional guides, you have to have CPR training. You gotta, you're not running a fly-by-night deal. It's a real deal and it's regulated. For number one, kind of this whole overcrowding issue, but two, to make sure it's a professional, safe service for the consumer. Any talk about that, forming a new board, or maybe perhaps joining the board of outfitters and professional guides in this?
Thank you, Representative Hartzman, and I will answer it first, and then I may actually punt it to a former committee member, Representative Storr, to back me on this. It was discussed, and we went very deep into the outfitters and guides boards, talked to them, worked through maybe adding even bringing some fishing folks into their board and expanding it. We had testimony, I believe, during the general session from them saying that they're working right now at capacity, and certainly with their limited resources and limited funding, and they were a bit, and it came back to that number. We don't know how many would join. There are talks, are there 100 fishing guides in Wyoming, or are there 1,000? We don't know. So they said, well, if there's 100, maybe we can take this on and add one staff member. If there's 900 fishing guides, and coming from out of state, this will completely dismantle what we have finally achieved, which is kind of a revenue neutral guide board. And then there was talk of a whole separate guide board. I think some of our colleagues resist that. We as representatives, if you do that, you have to take into account the fiscal note and the time traveled and getting folks. We have a lot of vacancies on boards right now, and statewide and locally, even on nonprofit boards. So I think that was some of the fear of the committee as to if we go that direction, and really where it is best that we land the situation we have. And then the fly-by-night question, I think, is really appropriate, Representative Hartzman, because if you are permitted through a federal agency, which many folks are, you do have to have minimums, CPR, first aid, insurance. But there are, and in Casper, when we were there for a committee meeting, I went a day early and hired a guide and went and fished the mile. And of the 12 boats, 11 were non-Wyoming boats. And there's no way to know if they have minimums of insurance, first aid, CPR. Swiftwater Rescue is another one that's popped up personally as someone that my former company required that just for professional standards. So many of these guides you see in your neck of the woods, in Thermopolis and Lincoln County and Sublette County, they meet a gentleman at a bar, take a check, and meet him at 6 a.m. the next morning and go fishing. And there is no oversight statewide, and it is a bit scary because there are accidents in drift boats and fishing and waders and exposure to elements in some of these areas. And so I think you bring up a great point, but the fly-by-night, is happening all over, and I think this is a good first step to try to get that answered. And I would ask Representative Storff, because she was in on these committee meetings, to shed light on, you know, if that's how you understand and remember all of our different discussions on where to land this.
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Harshman, and thank you for those words, Chairman Byron. Yes, I think we saw this as a good first step that would help us understand what we probably need in the future down the road, and that it's really think of it as an evolution, but recognizing that we really do have issues with outfitters who may or may not be safe, who may or may not have the right kind of background and liability and experience, and recognize that getting on the water can be a deadly experience in some cases, and we've seen that in places across the state. So the goal was safety. The goal was also to preserve the fishing experience. We all agreed that this isn't really impacting the fishery necessarily, but it is impacting the fishing experience, and we want to make sure that our employees in the state have an opportunity to get on these waters and to earn a good living, and who know those waters best, frankly. So I think this is a great first step. I was trying to remember, and maybe this is a question for the agency, like, but I'm curious in your memory, Chairman Byron, like what, and to Representative Worf's point, just clarity on what we expect the agency to do based on a request to come in and look at an area and what that might require. I don't think the bill really speaks to that exactly, the specifics. So I'm just trying to remember what our thinking was on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
You
you.
want to add?
Thank you, Chairman
Wrap
Harshman.
that
I'll try to
up.
be brief on this. I think we left it broad because some of these bodies of water are hundreds of miles long. So, I mean, you may regulate stuff in and around Sublette County on the New Fork River, which is in terms of rivers, a shorter river, which might be a lot different than the Salt River, which has dozens of different sections on it. So I believe that's why we left it broad. And to your point, it was certainly the first step because we wanted to at least get a baseline to then, you know, be able to either go back to the department or look internally as electeds on if this is working or not.
Okay, I'd like to invite any legislators, there's two in the room, if you'd like to make comments on this, and then any other elected officials, county commissioners, any of those folks would like, and then we'll go to agency. If you'd like to come on up. And good afternoon, go ahead and introduce yourself and welcome.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. My name is Representative Jamie Lean. I represent House District 38, and I came to speak in opposition of this legislation today. You see, I have several small businesses in my district that this would drastically affect. So I offer for you a few solutions. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is Article 2, Section 39 of the Constitution, where it guarantees the opportunity to hunt, fish, and trap for all individuals in the state of Wyoming. The exact verbiage says, shall forever be preserved to the individual citizens of the state. Nowhere in this legislation does it say that Wyoming needs to come first. When we put Wyoming first, we also need to add an amendment that the people that live within that county have the first right of refusal to be able to enter those waterways the very first that day, so that we're not drastically impacting the small businesses that already live within the waterways in Wyoming. I know that in the Cowboy Code, it says that we need to be tough but fair, and sometimes that job is hard to do. But I want to recognize that with regulation of the waterways, we need to make something stick for out-of-staters that are coming in, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of Wyoming first. I also want to mention that House Bill 5 does not regulate any out-of-staters, and that it doesn't regulate where they may go in the state. And I know that you're promulgating the rules to the commission, and I think the commission has the opportunity to do well with this, but I also agree with Co-Chairman Harshman. Thank you very much for your suggestion. This was a conversation that I had with Chairman before coming to this meeting about creating a board just for this, just to regulate it, or giving it to the outfitters. And I do think that that is an opportunity that we need to evaluate. I also want to draw your attention to, oh, sorry, I lost my notes here. that if you leave this as is, it's restricting the number of boats that will launch, that it's protecting the big corporations and allowing for monopolies to come in. That we're not going to say that somebody comes from out of state and they have 100 permits for that waterway for the day. The small man may not be able to get there first if we don't give them the first right of refusal and make sure that we're taking care of our citizens first. And with that, I'm open to any questions.
Okay, any questions for Representative Lee? Okay, Representative Campbell.
You're still not chairing?
No.
Okay.
I'm all-
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here and representing your district so well. Couple of questions for you. First isn't a question. I'm gonna think about how to phrase it in a question. You're aware that the Constitution does grant those rights for individuals, but that doesn't apply to commercials or commercially operated.
Right.
Okay,
My concern is that,
So work through the chair.
I apologize.
Go ahead,
okay.
continue
I
this.
just, yeah, just a clarifying that it doesn't violate individuals, right? So you mentioned drastically impact some of the folks. If you had might you have data or examples of the number of people that might be impacted and what those impacts might be?
Representative Lane.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative. On your first point, it will impact the individuals that live along the rivers as well. This says that any commercially guided, but what about the individuals that come? At what point do those individual boats overrun the commercial boats? And how do you guarantee that the people are going to follow this law if they say, oh, I got a drift boat, I might take my buddy out one time, and then just as Chairman Byron gave in the presentation of the bill, you have a lot of these people that come in and maybe at the bar that night, they meet somebody and the next day they're out fishing. And so we don't always have an opportunity to regulate every individual. The people that live along the rivers should have the ability to continue to use the rivers. And then drastically impacting, I don't know if I can say them online, but I have several drift boat companies within my district alone. My district encompasses the North Platte, Alcova Pathfinder, the like. And I know that this will impact them. And I know that if my county has this, I can think of 4 individual drift boaters that it would impact within my district. And if that's the case, then you still have Teton County, Sublette County, Sweetwater County, that will all have the same amount or more of drift boaters that come in.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lean, could you point to me in the bill where it says this law will not apply to anyone that comes into the state of Wyoming?
Well, I think that,
Representative Lane.
Chairman, Representative, I think that that's my point, is that it doesn't say out-of-staters must register. It doesn't say that they don't have to register, that they don't have to register either.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, go ahead. Provenza.
The basic understanding of how laws work is that if the law is written in the state of Wyoming and you come to the state of Wyoming, you have to follow the laws of the state of Wyoming. It's the same as, for one example, say someone from the state of Colorado can't come to the state of Wyoming and use marijuana. It's Wyoming law. So it will apply to the large corporations and anybody else who wants to come to Wyoming.
Okay. Lee?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that statement. I guess I failed to communicate that if we are not regulating the amount of out-of-staters versus the local boats on the water, that we're not taking care of our Wyoming citizens first. And we need to do that. That is my bigger concern here, that we take care of our local people first.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Representative Provenza? No? Okay. Going to move on. Are you finished and you stay? We might ask you more questions. Representative Winter, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chairman. My name is John Winter. I am a legislator from District 28, and I'm going to mention that I represent parts of Fremont County, all of Hot Springs County, part of Bighorn County, and part of Park County. And the reason I say that is because in addition to the main Fremont County, I represent quite a bit of the reservation. And the Wind River flows through the reservation. and it comes into Hot Springs County. And you should know that there's a parking lot for boaters there at the Wedding of the Waters on the Bighorn. And that parking lot is full most every day in the summertime. And it's full of all kinds of boaters, but there's a lot of non-resident boats registered in there. So it's really a serious matter, especially for the Thermopolis area and Hot Springs where the river runs through. And I have discussed this situation with several outfitters, both in around the state. And these legitimate fishing outfitters who work on the Green, the Platte, the Bighorn, and even the Shoshone River, they want to be regulated. They want something done here from the state to get some kind of control on what's going on out there on these streams. And the problem is, this is such a big deal that no one knows how many legitimate outfitters are actually trying to make a living out there. And we have to be cognizant of the residents that come in for their private enjoyment, but the problem looks like is the outfitters, the mostly or out-of-state outfitters, and quite a few from different counties that float these different rivers. So the Wyoming Board of Outfitters and Pro Guides was mentioned previously, and my experience with them has been that they are willing to discuss this, and there's two sides of it. Some of the guys don't want to be involved in it, but for the fishing outfitters, but others are saying that they would be willing to deal with it. I think that we have to, as Wyoming is concerned, we need to consider that outfitting is outfitting, no matter what it is. It's ice climbing, biking, fishing, hunting outfitters, or whatever. So we need to think about that as we process this bill. So that's about all I have to say, I guess.
Got any questions for Representative Winter? Okay, Chairman Byron has a question.
Thank you, Chairman Harshman. Representative Winter, you were on and involved in the last 2 years plus of these meetings. Can you quickly shed light on where we ended up with all the different options? You know, we've gone from a very heavy-handed approach to this, you know, what we view and some view as probably the just first step and light-handed approach. And you were boots on the ground at a lot of those discussions. So can you shed light on where we've landed and given all the discussions on whether or not we create a new board or we go all the way in terms of regulating? Can you shed light on where you stand on that?
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chairman and Chairman Byron. As I remember, the first step, this bill represents the first step, is to get a handle on how many outfitters we have out there, legitimate outfitters. And at the same time, we're going to figure out how many non-residents and out-of-county people are involved in this. And I think it's going to come down to sometime to tell each outfitter that they can be on this river or that river and only for this amount of time or something. I don't know what's going to happen, but there's got to be some kind of control. So as I remember, that's kind of where we left it.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you both for your testimony today. Are there any other elected officials, any county commissioners, mayors? See only one in the room. Commish, welcome. Please introduce yourself and where you're from.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to come forward. I'm going to actually speak to you today wearing my hat as the representative of the Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association, which was just mentioned by the good agriculture.
And your name.
And my name. My name is Bill Novotny. I am from Buffalo, Wyoming, and I'm a Johnson County Commissioner. Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association, for you new members of this committee, is the trade association for commercial activities that occur in Wyoming in the outdoors. We have been in operation since 1959, and we represent 90 million of Wyoming's 200 billion tourism industry. We, as has been stated, have been involved in this discussion since the very beginning, at least the last 6 years. And our preference is what was articulated by Representative Winter, is this is the good first step. This is how we figure out how many folks are commercially operating on Wyoming's waters. At that point, then you can make the decision, or the Game and Fish, if you need to begin to do what is called area authorization, which was mentioned, which would allow then to control where people fish, how many commercial boats can be on the waters. And I do want to make also a key point here. Outdoor recreation in Wyoming is a privilege, but when it comes to hunting and fishing, you must have a license to do it. A non-resident pays $14 per day to recreate in Wyoming, whereas a resident pays $6. For a resident of Wyoming to get an annual fishing license, that's $24 plus the conservation stamp. For the non-resident, it is $107. Non-residents are responsible for between 80 and 86% of the Wyoming Game and Fish's budgets because of the price differential that are charged between resident and non-resident licenses. So I would caution attacking the non-resident, and I would also remind folks of the Commerce Clause, and they have that opportunity to come here and enjoy that. Certainly you do have a bill, I think, that's going to come before this committee that is going to look at those non-resident fees. And certainly as we are dealing with these resource questions in our fisheries, that may be the best way to address those. But I do think this is a wise first step. The State Board of Outfitters are individuals appointed by the governor that regulate the outfitting industry. Outfitters are the umbrella and have guides that work under them. As has been mentioned, they have to be licensed. They have to pass a test that shows they are competent in various things to protect those customers. They have to have a business license to operate in Wyoming. They have to have insurance. And if they're going to do business on state or federal grounds, they have to have a permit to do that. So this is a good first step to begin to figure out, number one, how many folks are outfitting on Wyoming waters, and then take the appropriate steps, once we know that, to protect the resource and also the experience. Because as outfitters, we do not guarantee that you are going to get a big buck or land a huge trout. What we will guarantee you is the best experience possible while you're here in Wyoming. So I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have about outfitting or the Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association.
Okay, any questions for Commissioner Novotny? Okay, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. I'd like to open it up now to any agency heads or members of agencies, commission, those folks, and then we're going to move to public comment. And I just say there's 3 bills on our agenda today. We were shortened a half hour of meeting time today. And I don't want to speak for the chairman, but I think 204 and 211, we might have to carry over to a future meeting. Any folks here for 204 and 211 traveled here today? Is there anybody in the room that traveled here at 204 or 211, those bills behind this one? Okay, I don't see anyone here that traveled to Cheyenne today, because we certainly want to hear from the public on those. Okay. And I just remind folks that 1:30 is when we gavel back in today. Okay? All right, so welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Vice Chairman Harshman, committee members, I'm Alan Osterlin, Chief of Fisheries for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. So I come here to answer any questions you might have relating to the bill or the fisheries resource for the state as you contemplate.
Okay, members' questions. Representative Wharf has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the question I have is this even needed? Does the commission need to have this in order to move forward and collect the data to determine what kind of pressures are there? Because I know this has been a recurring, I look back when I was on the other side, And I know this is a big issue, but I guess I just don't know why we need the bill. Does the commission need something for them to go out and collect this data, or can they already instruct the department that how they would recommend collecting that data so that you could come back in the future and tell us you have this many commercial boats, this many residential boats, this many, non-resident commercial boats? Give us a better idea, because I agree, I think this is a good first step, but I just don't see, that's my question, does the commission need authorization in the form of a bill, or can they collect this already?
Mr. And I want to say your name right.
Osterland.
Osterlin.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Osterlin, thank you.
So Vice Chairman, Representative Worf, so that's a tricky question, because if we have already been collecting data, as Representative Byron indicated, this has been a slippery ball. People are trying to get their hands around for a long time. And so we do have data that we've been collecting about launch times and how many boats are on a particular stretch of water, because we knew this was an interest to a lot of folks. And it's a snapshot. We've got some baseline information that we collected over the years in Casper for quite a long time, but we did a real concentrated effort around the state, 20 and 22, and again in 24. So we do have that data. Is it a resource issue for the department? Statewide, no. There are some areas that, again, Representative Byron indicated, like the Gray Reef, where we've done a hooking injury assessment, that we think that it probably does have an impact there. But the department has tools via our commission regulations that we can address that, which we're contemplating right now. So we can address the resource issues already. As far as the experience aspect of it, or the social aspect of it, we've been getting complaints for a while, and I know it's been ticking up, especially ever since COVID in certain areas. If you look at the plat around Casper, our information that we've collected in creel surveys, it's 90% non-residents, which indicates that a lot of those are commercial use. What's commercial use fishery there? The Bighorn has really ticked up. Kind of the genesis of this bill originated over there in the Green River, for the New Fork and the Green River. So, people feel impacted when there's a lot of people coming into their backyard. So it is an experience issue for a lot of folks. So there's where the trickiness comes in.
Hey, Mr. Osterland, you have a follow-up? Okay, go ahead.
Just to follow up, I still don't understand, does the commission need to have this bill for them to actually move forward with this? Or is this something that the commission can already go out and address? Because I guess I'm sitting there looking at this, the only way I'm gonna support this is if we change the may to a shall, because I don't see any reason to tell them that they may do something that they can already do. And so that's what I'm wanting to know is, do we need to tell the commission to do this? Or can they already go out and do it without us giving them that directive?
Mr. Osterland.
Vice Chair, Representative Worf, this bill for me, as I read it, gives us the authority, which we do not have right now, to go in and potentially limit, like I'll give, for instance, if we wanted to go in and limit the number of watercraft on a particular day on a stretch river like the Gray Reef, this gives us the authority to do so. Or if we design any regulation that might limit the commercial use of a fishery, say we prohibit commercial use on all Thursdays or all Saturdays. That's how some states do it. So this statute gives us the regulatory authority to do it. And if we decide that we want to do that, as I read the bill, on a particular stretch of river like Gray Reef, the bill gives us the authority to do the permitting. So we could permit on that stretch of water and generate some funds for implementation of the program. So no, we could not do it without this bill. We could not do those things.
Okay, Representative, or Mr. Osterlund, my question is this, on page 2 of the bill, paragraph A gives you that power to regulate the number of boat launchings. That's how I read this, but paragraph B then really gives you the opportunity to set up the fee structure, to pay for it, and to require registration. So, because I'm hearing this is the first step, we don't know how many are out there. I think the first step would be paragraph B. And then we'd come back and start talking about paragraph A. How are we gonna do this? Because we might wanna say, hey, the landowner that borders that water gets first preference. We might wanna say that, and we might wanna say, in-state, get the first 25, 50% of launchings, or all those kind of things. So I guess this bill could go forward, in my mind, without paragraph A. That's what I'm hearing about, this regulation. The big guys are gonna come in and out of state and just swamp our small operators. What's your thoughts on that?
Vice Chair Harshman, committee members. So you're correct. I'm not sure that as written, the bill is going to give you the number generation of how many outfitters we have. If you read in paragraph B, 13 down to about 19, it talks about if we can require registration payment of an annual fee on a trailer, outfitter, professional fishing guide, and any lake or river or section thereof for which the commission has set limits or other regulations. So we might go forward and say we're doing it in Gray Reef, we're gonna do it in Bighorn, and we're gonna do it on the Green. That's gonna give you an idea of how many outfitters we have in those areas, but not a statewide number for sure, if that's what you're looking for.
As I read that, and as you read it, really, you take out line 19, line 18, you'd require registration of all outfitters. That gives you the number. Okay. Okay, very good. Any other questions, Mr. Ostrand? Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Osterlund, I'm just curious, how does this process in your mind start? What needs to happen in order to provide a process for a community who wants to figure out how to regulate commercial fishing guides, and how you see that working through both the agency and the commission? Thank you.
Vice Chair
Go ahead.
Harshman, I'm sorry. Representative Storr. Yeah, that's a very excellent question because, we're a resource management agency, and now we're going to be dealing with a commercial activity. And anytime you're dealing with commercial activity, as you heard people mention, you're impacting people. So I would anticipate that we'd have to have public meetings in at least the county or a community where we're anticipating doing something to try to get a feed on what kind of support we're going to have. And, we do have baseline information on how many boats certain times a year, like I mentioned, but we don't have real comprehensive information. So if we were going to say on the Bighorn River, we're limited to 20 boats per day, in my mind, we're going to have a lot more information to justify why it's only 20 boats and why we're excluding other people from using it. So we'd have to collect a lot more information in our boat surveys that we've done so that we can justify. Right now, we just have baseline information because we knew the committee would need something to go on. So that's what we've been doing. Then from there, say for instance, we decided we're going, in my mind anyway, how the process works. If we're going to look at Gray Reef, and I would think we'd do it in chunks. Look at Gray Reef and Bighorn, and the Green River, those are the three that we've heard people wanted. We'd start there and look at how much interest there is in doing something on those areas. And that's where appreciated Representative Byron through this whole process. That's why he did the May. So it gives us some options to do things that we might need to do and the timing of that. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Follow up on that. You're good. Okay, Representative Wharf has another question, Mr. Osterlin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got thinking, I mean, we're just talking about commercial, regulating the commercial use, but I wondered if you've also looked at what the sportsmen, the average, the guys that are just the run-of-the-mill guys that want to go fish, does the department have an idea what percentage of the use is non-commercial? You know, because we're talking about regulating the commercial. I want to make sure that as we regulate that, that we also make sure that it's not adversely impacting those that are also just trying to recreate for fun. So does the department have those numbers as far as what percentage of use is non-commercial versus what is commercial?
Mr. Osterlin.
Vice Chair and Representative Wharf. So during that survey we did on Wyoming's floatable rivers for those 3 years, we did do creels along with that, which creel survey is just going up and asking somebody how they did and are you a resident, are you a non-resident? So we know like on the Gray Reef, it's 90% non-residents. So it has very little resident participation. And if you look at different areas like the Green River and the Bighorn, it's a higher percentage. I can't quote what those are right now, but yeah, we have some data on that.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Osterlin? Okay, appreciate your knowledge, wisdom, and service to our great state. How many years have you been at the Game Fish?
I'm going to, Vice Chairman, I'm sorry, I'm going to reflect my age a little bit. We're coming on 39.
Wow, well done. Appreciate your service.
Real quick question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative
Sorry.
Provenza, you're not off the hook yet.
How do you feel about the effective date being this July 1st?
Mr. Osterlin.
Vice Chair Harshman, Representative Provenza. That would give us, it's a short time frame. It would give us, that's when the statute would go in effect and would direct us to promulgate the rules that we need to do. So.
Just a question too before you leave. So if we were to, going back to kind of what I asked here a few minutes ago, if we were to take like paragraph A out of this and you know, and do a little work on that line 19, whereas this just becomes first step, literally a registration bill. So you actually know the numbers. I mean, is that helpful? Like, I'm hearing from my constituents like, geez, you're gonna regulate the little guy out of business because just sheer numbers, the out-of-staters, as you mentioned, will get 90% of the permits or whatever and squeeze us out. What do you think? Is that helpful to still move this forward like that or not?
Vice Chair Harshman, it certainly would give us an idea of how many we're dealing with, whether it's 200 or 1,000. I think if my opinion, it's going to be up towards that 1,000, but we don't know that for sure, depending if you lump into the current big game outfitters and guides that are regulated by the outfitter board. They also, some of those folks also do fishing trips. So there's already that component, and I know the outfitter board could give us that number for sure. But it certainly, as we had talked through at the interim level, getting an idea how many we're talking about would be a good step, yes.
Okay, anyone else from any agencies, state agencies, please come forward. Thank you, Mr. Osterlin. Okay, we're looking at about a little less than 30 minutes before we gavel back in. like to keep working this bill. I would say, folks, on 204 and 211, probably not going to happen today. So it'll be on Thursday. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Dave Glenn, Director of Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources. I'll be very brief. This is first off, I would say that Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources, we actually do permit concessionaires to fish upon our state parks. I'm not concerned about this bill. We've talked with Game and Fish. If this was to move forward, we would still work with them to do that. But what we are seeing from an outdoor recreation perspective is this exploding throughout the state. And especially, you talk about the Green River in August and other things, but in May, when all these other rivers are blown out, these tailwater fisheries just get hammered because people are coming from out of state to do this. And there's one thing I want to throw out. We talk about 90% being non-residents, but those 90% are not being guided all by non-resident folks. The majority of the business, the commercial business on the Gray Reef, is usually non-resident folks that are coming to fish to hire a resident guide to do that. Being a personal fisherman, going up to the Miracle Mile, it kills me to see vehicles from Colorado pull in. They drive their clients up from Fort Collins. They buy their food in Fort Collins. They give them a picnic. They fish them for a day and they leave. They use our resources, and yes, they are paying for their licenses, but there should be a way to be able to manage them to where the state or the Game and Fish is being able to track them. And having come from a previous background where we managed 56 special use permits, this is something that can be done. It's being done throughout the West. It's done in Montana. It's done in Colorado. It's done in Grand Teton National Park. They do it by number of user days for outfitters. They do it by number of launches for outfitters. They do all those types of things. There's ways that this can be done to really focus on supporting what Representative Lean was saying about supporting the residents and the resident guides and outfitters. You can look at what is sustainable, how many of those are non-resident, how many of those are commercial, how many are not commercial, how many are resident, figure out a percentage, say, okay, we're gonna give first grace to those commercial outfitters that are on the river that live in that county. There's a lot of abilities to do that. But the last thing I would say is, from an outdoor recreation perspective, the people are here and they're coming. We have the ability to get out in front of this right now and to start figuring out where this is happening. I don't envision personally it happening throughout the state, just on some of these heavily used rivers, to get out in front of it before it overwhelms us and then we're pummeled. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Director, any questions? Director, thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Any other state agencies? We're going to open it up now to public comment in the room, and then we're going to go to online. So, and I think everyone understands, and I mean, we want to hear from everybody, no doubt, but try to keep your comments. We don't want one person to knock out 20 minutes, please. Okay. And we have 6 folks online too. Are there anyone else in the room that wants to testify on these bills? Just as you come up and have a seat, let's just stack these 4 chairs, and anyone else come up, sit in the front row, and we have kind of an idea. So just you 3 in the room? Okay, let's go from your left across. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Right, Mr. Chairman, my name is Paul Ulrich. I am a professional fly fishing guide out of Sublette County, Wyoming, Pinedale specific. I float the Green in the New Fork. And Mr. Chairman, got a number of areas I can cover here, and I'm certainly going to attempt to ask some of the questions that were asked. I have been part of this process for the last 2 years under the chairman's leadership and many others, including Representative Stohr's work. And I can tell you from the onset that we have a problem in Wyoming. From a fly fishing guide perspective, we are 100% unregulated by the state of Wyoming. We don't have to have first aid. We don't have to know how to row a boat. You don't know how, the list goes on and on and on. And there's no system in place to even prove some of the basics. Do you have insurance for your vehicle? So if you get in an accident transporting a client to and from, is that client protected? Are you protecting yourself? Are you protecting your client? So we can certainly talk about that, but I want to talk about really the bill itself and then some of the issues that have been raised. First and foremost, as we see it, this bill does 2 things somewhat independently. One, Mr. Chairman, to your point, it establishes what I believe we want to establish, and that is a statewide permitting system for all fly fishing guides in the state of Wyoming. In addition to that, it also authorizes Game and Fish, which they currently do not have authorization to, if deemed necessary, to regulate boats on a beat. The reason the permitting is important is been made clear by some of the speakers today, is we're getting killed by out-of-state guides. I'm gonna cut to the chase. We've got guide services that are coming across the border into Wyoming, utilizing our resource we pay for, we protect, we love, spending money in other states, bringing their clients up, fishing our rivers, our natural resources. And do we do that with any other natural resource in the state? No. And then they're pulling that money back. A permitting system, in theory, would have a very low fee for an in-state guide and a different fee structure for an out-of-state guide. And I believe that that is something that can be promulgated via the rules. What that does is put us where we need to be, on a level playing field with out-of-state guides and guide services that are taking advantage of the fact that we have no system whatsoever in place. So I think that's a really important element. And we also believe that a permit system in the state with a graduated fee is going to help reduce, hopefully, some of that out-of-state traffic. And at the very least, put us on a level playing field as an in-state guide. As a guy that lives here, that houses our clients here, that pays our taxes here in Wyoming as a small business, we really just simply want a level playing field. So a permitting system is going to help that. Mr. Chairman, to your point, and something I spoke to Game and Fish about last week when this bill almost came up, was exactly that. Perhaps an advisory board needs to be part of this system. Mr. Chairman, as you know, Fly Fishing Guides, we don't have an association. There's a few of us here, a few of us online, but we'd really like to have a voice as small business people in the state when it comes to what these rules and regulations look like if this bill passes. And so I think attaching an advisory board, which can be done either via statute, Mr. Chairman, as you know, or through the Game and Fish process, either way is fine by us. But we do think that's important, can help guide this process very significantly. The quality of the experience is something that we're really trying to hang on here. If any of you have fly fished or been on any rivers, Colorado, Montana, elsewhere, it's elbow to elbow. They're on the bank, they're on the boats, they're all over the place. And we have something special here in Wyoming. What we can typically offer is that experience of solitude on Wyoming's waterways. However, every single summer I guide, I am seeing that experience get whittled down and whittled down and whittled down. When COVID hit, all heck broke loose, Mr. Chairman. And we've got real issues on the number of individuals in commercial outfits on the river. So with that, love to stand for some questions.
Okay, any questions, members? So I appreciate your testimony today. Okay, I'm going to move to your right. Welcome. Introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Chris Hayes. I am a fly fishing guide in Paul's area as well, in the Upper Green River Valley. I traveled here today not to represent an organization, but to represent the sentiments of the communities that this issue is affecting in our area. The Upper Green River Valley, we've got a number of small towns, Cora, Daniel, Bondurant, Pinedale, Boulder, Big Piney, Marbleton, LaBarge. I think I covered them all. There are a bunch of folks who wanted to be here to speak today, but given the current conditions in the roads, I was elected to go. So I hope you'll excuse me if I take an extra minute or two to speak on their behalf, as opposed to just myself. So I'll speak quickly. I'm going on 2 decades as a professional in the fly fishing industry. I've been the kid behind the counter at the shop, the guy fending off the grizzlies while landing fish, the manager behind the desk, and I'm at present a senior guide with Wyoming Fishing Company based in Daniel. I've seen a pretty good amount of what this industry entails. I've pursued my passion for this sport across the U.S. and into several other countries, and because of that, I can tell you that Wyoming is the last best place in the continental United States for trout fishing. But that is changing. Historically, the waters of Wyoming have proven to be an ideal habitat for several species of trout and a few other species, all of which are prized game fish for anglers. There are a few reasons, but one in particular, that our waters have provided anglers with that chance of a lifetime to pursue the fish of their dreams. That reason is simply that getting to some small town in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, is not very easy. For a long time, we didn't have a lot of people fishing the waters here. Fish populations have done incredibly well, especially considering how fragile the majority of our aquatic ecosystems are, but that has changed. The fisheries of Wyoming are extremely fragile. We are a high desert state. The majority of our water that is reasonably accessible is not way high up in the mountains. It's in the valleys, meandering its way through sagebrush desert, where fish have a narrow window between winter starvation and water that's too hot to survive. Trout don't do well in hot water. Throw in an outright onslaught of boats, hooks, and lines, and their chances of growing into those true trophy fish of a lifetime dwindle to near zero. In the last decade or so, we have watched as our waters have become more and more crowded. We've watched as the sport of recreational fishing has exploded in popularity in the national consciousness. And I'll let you in a little bit about fishing guides. We tend to go where the fishing's good. Make no mistake, we are on the radar now. On any given day, at least in my area, the number of commercially operated boats is easily twice that of non-commercial floaters, easily. Many days, the only boats out there are commercially operating guides. In my neck of the woods, I learned early on that if you pulled into a boat ramp and there were 2 trailers already parked there, you better go to a different stretch because you weren't going to have a very good day. Nowadays, it's not uncommon to have 20 or more boats, commercial boats, on a given stretch, on sections of river that you can easily throw a rock across. This amount of relentless pressure has led to an enormous decline in the quality of our fishery in my region, as well as nearly every river in the state that you can float a boat down. In every corner of the state, floatable water is being exploited beyond a level that our fish populations can sustain. Wyoming is a dream for people. It's wild, it's free. For those that are inclined towards the outdoors, it conjures up fantasies of the untamed, the possibilities to experience something you just can't experience anywhere else, and that's why people come here. For anglers, the rather inconvenient process of getting here is worth it to chase that dream, because at least in parts of the state, that dream is still attainable. But if we allow the exploitation of our fragile resource to go unchecked, what do we become? Do we want to be a former destination for chasing dreams? For every year, myself and fellow guides that have made their homes here, raised families here, have scraped and sweated and bled for this idea that is this free state of Wyoming, watch as the people that spend a rather significant amount of money to visit here stop coming because their dreams end in disappointment. Let's put it in economic terms. This industry isn't bringing in the revenue that mineral extraction or ranching brings in, but it does bring in a significant chunk of change when you factor in the money spent on lodging, guides, food, gas, gear, you name it. That expenditure by anglers does contribute significantly to the economies of small towns across the state. We're facing a simple case of supply and demand. Anglers come here because they've seen the pictures and heard the stories of trout bigger than they can ever have a chance at in other places. When the word gets out in the angling community that Wyoming is just another Colorado or Montana, where your typical day is full of jockeying for position with other boats and catching a handful of mutilated, run-of-the-mill size fish, why will they spend the extra effort to come here? I've had very good, long-standing clients that I consider real friends that I've watched just stop coming because of the decline we've already seen. Once we had regulation by the state of commercially guided fishing. That went by the wayside in the late 1980s, and at the time, things were more or less okay. Angling pressure was relatively light. That has changed. We are facing a flood of pressure, particularly on the commercial side, that our rivers just cannot sustain. Many of the commercial operators on our rivers now are coming from other states. From the economic perspective, we're missing out and basically giving away the quality of our fisheries for nothing. In every watershed in the state, there are multiple out-of-state operators that exploit our fisheries resources and in return contribute practically nothing to the economy save the cost of an angler's fishing license. Sorry to be a little repetitive. This simply cannot continue if we wish to maintain the quality of our fisheries and in doing so, maintain the demand side of the equation that brings people here. The bill which has been presented here will not in itself fix this or any of the other problems our fisheries face today. What it will do is provide authority to our Game and Fish Department to be able to establish a framework of regulation to protect and preserve this incredibly special and exceptionally rare resource that we are so fortunate to have. I realize that a professional guide saying these things may sound hypocritical, as I myself am part of the problem. I would hang my oars up today if in doing so would mean that years from now, I would be able to share the same incredible experiences that I've had on our waters with my daughter. Alas, my retirement alone would mean nothing, as there would be 3 other guides chomping at the bit to fill my shoes. Heck, you don't have to wait, they're already here. The guide community, while at face value expresses a deep respect and care for the resource, has failed repeatedly, to come together to self-regulate, so we're turning to you for help. Unfortunately, here we are facing a true tragedy of the commons, where without an intervening body to regulate the use of this fragile resource, it will collapse. So I ask you, members of this committee, Mr. Chairman, to advance this bill and give it your support as it makes its way through the legislative body. Things are changing more rapidly than most of us can believe, and without that intervention, the dream that is this last best place to chase our majestic quarry will fade into mediocrity. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate your comments, Mr. Hayes, and your testimony. Appreciate you, both of you driving here today from Sublette County. And okay, next, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I have to follow that. I'm Jess Johnson. I'm with the Wyoming Wildlife Federation, and I know there's a lot of new faces up there, but I sit in front of you fairly regularly. We're one of the oldest hunting and angling organizations in the state. We've been around since 1937. You know, I could say ditto to a lot of what you've said, and I think a lot of where my organization is standing is that this is a problem that is like very in our faces here now today. The one I also want to talk about in this, though, is that this is a problem not just with fishing. This is going to go wildly outside of fishing someday. And so we're supportive in this as a first step, looking at the permits, looking at the numbers. I have some questions about if the Game and Fish is the right place to put a commercial sort of authority in. I think long-term, looking at a board makes a lot more sense. I also, when we talk about what's coming to Wyoming, we just have to look south and north. You look at the recreation that's coming, whether it's rock climbing, it's wildlife photography tours, it's biking, hiking. Outfitting is much larger than hunting and fishing. And we are going to have to wrestle with this. And it is a significant wildlife impact. It's something that when we stood up and we supported the Recreational Trust Fund, we did it because they looked at the wildlife impact for each of those grants. We have to have this, you know, we cannot get behind the ball on that because you will not catch the ball when it gets going. So looking at this as a larger thing, I would say, as this bill stands, this is important because this is a problem now. So we certainly need to do something now, and this bill is doing that. But we cannot let this be the only thing that goes through, and it cannot be something where we do this and we do nothing else. This doesn't fix things, and it doesn't need to stay at Game and Fish Authority. It needs to go somewhere where it has its own stuff. But this bill itself needs to go because we need to do something now. So this is like a first step is the way that I see it. And we're at the table long-term for this, you know, as recreation comes down, we just have to look at it and make sure we're smart about it. Doesn't mean no, it just means we have to figure out how we do it. The other part of this that I have, this is not a little fiscal impact to the department. This is a pretty big fiscal impact to the department, and that's sporting dollars, which we're happy to do, especially when it protects our resource and the quality of the experience. That being said, we should not be in the habit of passing legislation that doesn't have a pay for or something that helps offset that dollar. And I'm not saying that we need general dollars. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's other bills coming that look at funding and funding increases that we have to be realistic about. So if we're going to keep putting stuff on the Game and Fish to do and keep asking them to do this, we have to also pass the pay for to do it. And that is an incredibly important part of this. So we have to look at the larger problem, we have to fix the problem we have in front of us, and we have to make sure we're paying for the problem. So it isn't just consistently pecking away at a program that they're already strapped on. Aquatic invasive species and all of that stuff, they need more help on that as well. So if we're pulling dollars there, you wanna know where those dollars come from for Game and Fish to do that. It comes from programs. So we have to figure out how we balance that fiscally. So we have to fix the problem today, get the permitting numbers, understand what's happening, but we gotta look at it in a larger, long-term place to go at it. I think we have to look at it as boards. I don't know if it looks like Idaho, who has fishing guides as part of their Outfitters and Guides board, or we created a completely new system that looks like what Wyoming is. We're unique, we can fix our own problems the Wyoming way, but we need to be creative.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate you being here today. Appreciate all three of you. Now, we have 6 people online. I'm just gonna say, we're not gonna work this bill today. We're gonna run out of time. Got to be on the floor at 1:30. We originally thought 2 p.m. would be our time limit. Schedule changed today. I just want to go online. There are 6 folks. Are there any of you 6, if they can kind of communicate with you guys, or that can't be here Thursday, that we need to hear from today? Because we're just gonna, Mr. Chairman, I think we got to carry this bill forward on to Thursday. So are there any of those 6 folks on this bill that can't be here? They can hear me, I'm sure, that can't
Mr.
be
Chairman,
here.
I'm not sure if they will not be able to make it next time, but they can for sure feel free to register for.
I guess if any of them can't, can they communicate with you through a message or
Raise their hand.
raise their hand if they can't? On there, can you look and see, please? So I have 6, Rhett Bain, Paul Hayes, Sidney Handeland, Wes Richner, Blake Jackson, and Colby Spencer have signed up. And if any of those folks can't be here Thursday, I'd like to hear from them now. The committee wants to hear from them now. But if they can be here Thursday, we'd like to take our time and really start public comment with them, and then just pick up right where we've left off.
Mr. Vice Chairman, there is a Colby Spencer who has his hand raised, which I
Okay,
assume.
why don't we bring Colby in? And Colby, I see, is from Pinedale, and we'll hear from Colby. And members in the audience here, we're gonna just basically pick up on Thursday, right where we're leaving off today. Okay, so we're still in public comment, and we'll keep moving forward. And, okay. Mr. Spencer, can you hear us?
Yes, can you guys hear me okay?
We sure can. You've got the floor. Go ahead. We'd like to hear from you. We've got, probably 4 or 5 minutes. So,
Yes,
yeah, appreciate you joining us today.
appreciate the time. Thank you. I'll keep this short and sweet. All the things that I'd like to say have basically been put out there, but I've been a professional guide for now 18 years. I owned my own outfitting service in Pinedale for 5. With that being said, through those 18 years, the last 4 years has been an unbelievable amount of people on our rivers within Sublette County and also around the state. Within Sublette County, as Chris Hayes stated before, there's always, almost on a typical day, more commercial guides than there is people doing it publicly. This bill absolutely needs to be pushed through. This is definitely a starting point. Moving forward, through a regulatory system where we could put numbers on different sections of how many boats can be on one section, how many boats can be on another. That needs to be looked into as soon as possible. I see a decline in our fishing, and one of the biggest things is I see a decline in the experience. When you put on our rivers within Sublette County, it used to be you'd be out by yourself, but now you're putting on with 8 other people. There's been days I've had return clients with me in my truck. We pull in, see 6 other boats. I've canceled the day because I don't want to show my clients that kind of day. I want them to see what Wyoming was. I want to see them, what we expect as a fishing experience, a nice quiet river without dozens of other people around. Like I said, a lot of the other things that I wanted to state have previously been stated by others. So at this point, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, Mr. Spencer, our Chairman Byron has a question for you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Spencer, for joining. Can you touch on, as somebody that watched you grow up, and you probably don't know me, but floated with and by you often, can you talk a little bit about you mentioned 5 years you've owned your own company, so you're a small player in a pretty busy game. Can you tell me if you think this would affect the small entrepreneurs that are trying to get their foot in the door, get their boat on the water? You're potentially coming from a large company and really living the Wyoming dream and starting your own. Can you reflect on that for us?
Mr. Spencer, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I can definitely reflect on that. It does kind of scare me being the small fry, especially with larger guide service in place in the surrounding area who could gobble up some of these days at X amount of price. What I see is that I think that this should be regulated within our county so that, guys like me, a smaller guy, can still have first dibs on some of these days that would be out. Because if you're going to just say that, it's open to anybody really at a certain price or a certain point, there's going to be these larger groups that are going to come in and they're going to take all those days. And now with my business, I'm not going to be able to even put my boat on the water because of these problems. So I do see, maybe this isn't the answer, but this needs to be regulatory through a county aspect where the people in the county have the first right to be on the water.
Very good. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Spencer? Mr. Spencer, appreciate you joining us today. And I would just like to say to Mr. Jackson, Wes Richner, Sidney Handeland, Paul Hayes, and Red Bain, we'll start with you guys first thing on Thursday, and we are planning on a noon start to that meeting, give or take a few minutes. So with Chairman's okay, we'll start with that and continue this bill just as we've finished here today. So thank you, Mr. Spencer, and you folks who are here today. And to the 5 others, we look forward to hearing from you on Thursday. Okay, thank you, Ms. Spencer. So, no, Mr. Chairman, we don't need a motion to lay this bill back. We're just gonna continue the hearing of the bill on Thursday. So right now, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, we'll just, the meeting is adjourned, and the committee will come back, and we'll see you all again on Thursday. Thank you.